You just got rejected again. Not for being underqualified. Your resume was fine. Your GPA was fine. The interview went fine. They just went with someone else. And the feedback, if you even got any, was something vague like, "We decided to move in a different direction," or "We felt another candidate was a better cultural fit." Cultural fit. That phrase is doing a lot of work right now in corporate America, and most people do not fully understand what it means or what it is quietly measuring. You spent 4 years in college. You have the degree, you have the internship, you have the LinkedIn profile with the right keywords. You did everything you were told to do. And somehow, you are still sitting at home applying to jobs that never call back, wondering what exactly is wrong with you. Here is the uncomfortable answer. It might not be your qualifications at all. It might be something that nobody put in the curriculum, something that college does not teach, something that the last 3 to 5 years of your life, the pandemic years, the remote learning years, the algorithm years, may have quietly taken from you without anyone noticing. And in 2026, American employers are noticing, even if they do not have the language to describe what they are seeing. This is the story of why Gen Z has become, in the eyes of a growing number of hiring managers, genuinely difficult to employ. Not because they are lazy, not because they are entitled, but because of something far more specific, far more structural, and far more interesting than either of those easy explanations. Let us start with a number. A 2024 survey of over 1,000 American managers found that nearly 60% had fired a Gen Z employee within the first year of hiring them. Not laid them off, fired them, for performance and behavior reasons that the managers struggled to articulate precisely but consistently described in similar language. They couldn't handle feedback. They shut down under pressure. They seemed fine in the interview but disappeared the moment the job got hard. They expected things to move at their pace, not the company's pace. Now, before you dismiss that as boomer managers being out of touch, and some of them absolutely are, the pattern is too consistent and too widespread to explain away that simply. Something real is happening, and it starts much earlier than the first day of the job. It starts with what psychologists call distress tolerance. Distress tolerance is exactly what it sounds like. It's your capacity to sit inside discomfort without immediately escaping it, to stay in a hard conversation without shutting down, to receive critical feedback without your nervous system treating it like a personal attack, to do boring, repetitive work without your brain demanding immediate stimulation. It is, in short, the ability to be uncomfortable on purpose for as long as the task requires. And here's what the research is showing very clearly in 2026. Gen Z as a cohort has measurably lowered distress tolerance than every previous generation entering the workforce. Not because they are weak, but because of what their developmental years looked like. Think about what shaped this generation's relationship with discomfort. They grew up with smartphones from early adolescence, devices that were engineered, and that word is important, engineered, to eliminate waiting, to eliminate boredom, to replace every moment of emptiness with stimulation. Scroll, tap, refresh. The discomfort of having nothing to do was solved before it could ever be fully felt. Then came the education system's response to mental health awareness, which was well-intentioned, but it had an unintended consequence. As schools became more focused on reducing student distress, the tolerance for productive struggle quietly diminished. Deadlines became flexible, grades became negotiable. The friction that builds resilience was increasingly removed in the name of support. And then the pandemic hit, right in the middle of the developmental window where young people typically build their social muscle, the years when you learn how to navigate difficult people, how to perform under observation, how to read a room, how to hold yourself together when you're nervous. All of that went remote. And remote schooling, for all its conveniences, is a profoundly low-stakes environment. You could mute yourself, turn off your camera, disappear when things got uncomfortable, and nobody could stop you. 3 years of that, right at the age when the brain is still forming its basic templates for how to handle the social world. So, when these same young people walked into their first real job with its physical presence, its unclear hierarchies, its unspoken rules, its face-to-face conflict, many of them experienced something that felt genuinely unbearable. Not because the job was actually unbearable, but because their nervous system had never been trained to tell the difference between discomfort and danger. This is the core mechanism, and it's worth slowing down a second to understand it fully.
The human brain has a threat detection system. When it perceives a threat, it activates a stress response. Heart rate up, focus narrows, the body prepares to fight, flee, or freeze. This system evolved to handle physical threats, tigers, enemy tribes, famine. But the brain does not cleanly distinguish between physical threats and social or emotional ones. A harsh performance review activates the same stress response as a dangerous situation. A manager raising their voice registers in the nervous system much like an aggressor. In people with high distress tolerance, this response fires and then dampens quickly. They feel the discomfort, process it, and return to functional calm. The experience is, that was uncomfortable. I survived it. I can keep going. In people with low distress tolerance, the response fires and does not dampen quickly. The discomfort becomes unbearable. The immediate imperative is to escape. And the most available form of escape in a professional environment is shutting down, going quiet, calling in sick, submitting a resignation letter after 3 weeks. Hiring managers are calling it a soft skills crisis, but that framing is misleading. Soft skills implies something cosmetic, something about handshakes and eye contact and saying the right things in meetings. What they are actually describing is a dysregulation crisis, a fundamental difficulty in tolerating the emotional texture of real professional life. And the professional world, particularly in America in 2026, has not become gentler to compensate. If anything, it has become more demanding. The economic pressure on companies post-pandemic means leaner teams. Leaner teams mean each person carries more ambiguity, more responsibility, more direct exposure to consequence, more situations where you have to sit in discomfort for extended periods without a clear resolution. That environment is hard for anyone. For someone with genuinely compromised distress tolerance, it can feel impossible. Now here is where it gets more complicated and more interesting. The employers are not entirely right either, because when hiring managers say Gen Z cannot handle feedback, what they often mean is Gen Z does not respond to feedback the way we expect them to, and there's a difference. Many Gen Z workers have grown up in environments that were frankly psychologically unsafe, not in the corporate HR sense of that phrase, in the real sense. High rates of anxiety, high rates of family instability, a pandemic, an economy that made their future feel genuinely uncertain, a social media environment that trained them to expect attack from any direction at any time. So when a manager delivers feedback in a blunt, old-school way, the way that felt normal to Gen X or Boomers, because that is simply how it was done, a Gen Z employee may not be being fragile. They may be responding to the emotional tone of the delivery with a threat response that is entirely proportional to their history. The problem is not that they cannot handle feedback. The problem is that feedback, for many of them, does not feel like information. It feels like judgment. And judgment, historically, has come with consequences they could not control. This is the part that most corporate conversations about Gen Z completely miss. The distress tolerance issue and the psychological history issue are not separate problems. They're the same problem seen from two directions. One is the nervous system that was never trained to sit in discomfort. The other is the nervous system that learned, very early, that discomfort usually meant something was actually wrong. And when those two things combine in a professional environment, you get the pattern that managers are describing. Someone who seems highly capable in the interview, composed, articulate, intelligent, and then appears to fall apart the moment real friction arrives. Because the interview is a controlled, low-stakes performance. Most Gen Z candidates are very good at controlled, low-stakes performances. They've been doing them their entire lives on social media. The job is not a controlled performance. The job is sustained, unscripted, uncomfortable, and relentless. And that's where the gap reveals itself. There's another layer to this that nobody is talking about publicly: the expectation mismatch. Gen Z entered the workforce with a fundamentally different psychological contract than any previous generation, and this was not irrational. It was based on what they were told. They were told that finding meaningful work was the goal, that passion matters more than paycheck, that you should not stay somewhere that doesn't align with your values, that your mental health is more important than your productivity. These are not wrong ideas. In isolation, they're reasonable, but they created an expectation that professional environments would be, in some basic way, designed around their experience of them, that managers would be emotionally attuned, that feedback would come wrapped in care, that the work itself would feel consistently purposeful. And then they got the actual job, where the manager has 17 other people to manage and no time for emotional attunement, where the feedback comes in a 5-minute calendar invite with no agenda, where 3/4 of the work is administrative tasks that have nothing to do with passion or purpose.
The collision between the psychological contract they arrived with and the reality they found is genuinely jarring, not because they're spoiled, but because the gap is real and nobody prepared them for it. Previous generations had lower expectations going in, not because they were wiser, because they were not sold the idea that work should feel good. And here is the quiet, devastating irony of all of this. The generation that is most psychologically informed, that has the highest mental health literacy, that is most fluent in the language of boundaries and burnout and emotional labor, is the generation that is struggling most with the basic psychological demands of employment. They know the vocabulary, they can diagnose the problem in real time, they can tell you exactly what is happening to their nervous system. They just cannot regulate it. Knowing what anxiety is not the same as being able to stay in the room when it arrives. So what does this mean in practice for American workers and employers in 2026? It means we are heading into a significant labor market fracture that nobody is quite willing to name honestly yet. On one side, you have a generation that is highly educated, genuinely talented, socially conscious, and deeply aware, but who were not given the developmental experiences that build the tolerance for discomfort that sustained employment requires. On the other side, you have employers who are increasingly frustrated, who are making sweeping judgments about an entire generation based on patterns they see but do not fully understand, and who are not changing their management styles or their onboarding approaches in any meaningful way to meet the moment. Both sides are failing each other, and the person who pays the price, usually, is the 24-year-old sitting at home rewriting their resume for the 40th time, not quite understanding why none of it is working. There are early signals of how this plays out. The freelance economy is absorbing some of it. Gig work, contract work, project-based work. These structures suit people who struggle with the sustained, full-time, in-person demand of traditional employment. You control the environment, you control the pace, you can step away when the discomfort spikes without consequence. The entrepreneurship narrative is absorbing some of it too. Gen Z entrepreneurship rates are higher than any previous generation at the same age. Some of this is genuine innovation. Some of it is honestly a structural avoidance of employment environments that feel unnavigable. And some of it is not being absorbed at all. It is becoming the quiet unemployment and underemployment statistics that economists are starting to note with concern. Young people who are capable on paper, who want to work, who can't quite make conventional employment stick, and who are increasingly retreating into economic dependence or instability without a clear path out. The most honest thing I can say about this is that there is no single villain here. not the employers who are frustrated, not the young workers who are struggling, not the schools that tried to protect students from harm and accidentally shielded them from the productive discomfort that builds resilience, not the parents who wanted their children to feel valued and accidentally communicated that discomfort was always a sign that something was wrong. This is a systemic outcome, a generation shaped by a specific set of conditions that nobody designed intentionally, that produced a specific set of psychological gaps that are now colliding with a professional world that wasn't built for them and is not adapting quickly enough. And the question that I keep sitting with, the one that doesn't have a clean answer, is this. A generation this self-aware, this articulate, this genuinely capable of understanding complex systems and communicating about them. What happens when they figure out how to close the gap between knowing and tolerating? Because if that ever happens at scale, if this generation finds a way to combine their psychological literacy with the distress tolerance they were never given, the professional world they build will look nothing like the one they walked into. The question is just whether anyone is willing to wait that long.